Welcome to the Health Edge, translating the science of self-care. I am Mark Pettis with my friend and colleague, John Bagnulo. John, good morning, my friend.
Good morning, Mark. It's great to see you, and I'm excited to talk about sunlight.
Great to see you, John, as always. And the health effects of sunlight is one of our favorite topics, as our Health Edge listeners know. And this time of year, with these beautiful long peak days of sunlight, seems a good time to continue to reflect on the various dimensions of light as information, light as a free and readily available healing intervention for just about anything that someone in modern life would confront. And what I love about what we're going to touch on today, John, is the physics of sunlight, the physics of light and health. We often talk about how the modern medical enterprise is a very much of a materialist, reductionist model. There's a lot within that. I'm not discounting that. But it was really some of the early advent of quantum mechanics and quantum physics now over 100 years ago that opened an entirely different door into a reality that 100 years later is not really well, or if at all, integrated into this material reductionist model. And so much of the quantum realm is outside our senses' ability to fully appreciate. And when you don't see what's going on, even though you might be feeling what's going on, it's hard for the medical enterprise to take seriously anything that is sort of non-material. And so we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of Albert Einstein's photoelectric effect papers back in 1926, and he won the Nobel Prize in 1927, so 100 years ago, for the photoelectric effect. And basically today, what we're going to be looking at in 2026 is the photoelectric effect, the fact that every time you go outside, there is this reality interacting with you and interacting in a most profound way that one could easily, day after day, week after week, month after month, over a lifetime, have no full appreciation of. And when you look at what's happening at that level, for me, it brings me to my knees, John. It's so beautiful. It's so simple. It's so intelligent. It's so responsive, and it reveals the nature of a reality that I think we struggle to fully appreciate today. The information that we're bathed with every day, that sort of what is coming at us, and then there's the information that we are sending out into the world, and by way of our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors. And it's a feedback loop. There's feed forward, there's feedback, and all of this non-material interaction is affecting the material. And so, yeah, we might notice an inflamed joint or a high blood sugar or a high blood pressure. And in that material paradigm, we all know how that is interpreted and responded to, and surely there are some values within that paradigm. But what we're talking about here is something much more profound, and I hope it won't be too, I don't know, esoteric or too outside the box for folks. But some of the
I think it's
grounds,
fundamental. I think it's very fundamental, Mark. I think it speaks to the physiology, the power of photons, sunlight, and as an essential requirement for life. And that's why I don't think it's esoteric. I think it's one of the most important principles that people understand with respect to health. And it's, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think it's really far from esoteric. I think it's a core component of health is sunlight. And we have all of this evidence of how sunlight, there's a requirement for sunlight. And most people have such a limited understanding of that. They think vitamin D, and that's really all people think about. And they think the whole thing can be circumnavigated by taking a supplement. And I think what we're going to discuss today shows that no, it's so much more powerful. It's so much more influential on our physiology than vitamin D. So
Yes.
I think it's as far from esoteric as you can get. I would say this would be, for me, this would be maybe the single most important component of health is sunlight. And I feel very strongly about obviously nutrition and exercise and all those other pathways for information to change our life. But this is like you really can't have health without sunlight.
And we hope we can help people appreciate, if they don't already, that all of what we're talking about here can easily be extrapolated to nutritional science, to exercise physiology.
Sure.
And it really does sort of lift the veil on, I think, a more elegant and precise view of how we function biologically. So biophysics, in my view, is the future of medicine. It should be the future of all health sciences. Today, we continue to struggle 100 years later to fully integrate some of these amazing findings. And so, thank you for that, John. Let me open up a few slides here. And again, I apologize for those listening, not able to see these graphics. We'll do our best to sort of describe these. And I will make sure that all of our slides, of course, will be on our website, thehealthedgepodcast.com. The video recording of this, of course, you'll be able to visualize those slides on our Health Edge YouTube channel. And let's dive into this, right? So the physics of sunlight, we'll reference vitamin D, but I love what you said, John. This is so much more than about just vitamin D. And circadian rhythms, that we talk a lot about that. And it's one of the many ways that sunlight guides, choreographs, really fully integrates and coordinates our biology. And it's very easy to take that for granted day after day, but it's a beautiful and awe-inspiring model. And so we're going to look at how one photon, right, can unleash the activation of hundreds of genes in our DNA and all that comes from that downstream. I started researching some of this stuff some time back, John. I was amazed at how little of this I remember learning about, if at all, in high school, college. I did the sort of traditional pre-med. You could take quantum physics, but that was sort of the that was the course for the real geek and those that were maybe going to become PhD in physics. There was really no health implication. It wasn't about sort of the biologic effects of these remarkable quantum revelations. But it was really Einstein that suggested that light is really not this sort of continuous stream of what we see as light, but it's individual packets of energy. That this remarkable kind of revelation that light is these packets of energy, and each packet is referred to as a photon. And when a photon in some of the original research, but this is true in human biology. And we're going to be talking about the skin and cell membranes and mitochondrial membranes. When these photons interact with receptors in skin and cell membranes and mitochondria in the brain, electrons are released. This electrical energy emerges, and I think we're coming to see that this is a fundamental foundation for which much of human biology seems to function and rely upon for optimal function, right? This photoelectric effect. Hard to believe it's been 100 years, John.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the hardest thing to believe is not only that it's been 100 years, but how little of it has been appreciated or translated as influential on biological systems. Whether, you talked about circadian entrainment, but like hormone and the whole endocrine system is is really influenced here by these photons.
Absolutely. And another great physicist, Princeton physicist, Richard Feynman, he once famously said, and I love this, John, sunlight is captured in all matter. And I think that might be kind of a paraphrase of what Einstein referred to as material being frozen light.
Yeah.
So what we see as matter has at its basis light. And that light can also be looked at as vibration. And we know from this photoelectric effect that light can be looked at as electricity. And where there's electricity, there tends to be magnetism. And so you begin to see how a human being, a plant, an animal being out in nature is in perpetual relationship with these interactions, all of which are happening sort of below the surface of awareness. And some of the graphics that I'm going to be sharing here, John, come from a YouTube channel called The Feynman Way. I really get into the physics, so there are a couple of channels that I follow. This is one which takes a lot of Feynman's lectures. He died many years back now, but his brilliant lectures, they're today, I think they reveal more than ever. He was such a great thinker and a great teacher. And this was back in the days of the blackboard, right, John, where you started on the upper left side of the blackboard to the left. You work your way down and over, and by the end of the class, you had many square feet of blackboard covered in equations and diagrams and arrows. And this was sort of the methodology that I grew up with as a student. And so some of the graphics that we'll be sharing here are, what the blackboard would have looked like if you were sitting in Feynman's coveted classes and capturing his sort of views on sunlight. And Feynman studied under the great John Archibald Wheeler. John Wheeler, also a Princeton theoretical physicist, a brilliant fellow. These were very holistic thinkers, even though they were immersed in some of the most sophisticated mathematics and abstract sort of scientific principles that existed. These were very, I'm struck when I look at the lives of these individuals, John, at the humility. Wheeler, as many physicists were during his life, were involved in the Manhattan Project, and they had the most advanced human understanding of nuclear physics and thermonuclear principles, and never never expecting that that knowledge would be applied toward weaponry. But when it's all hands on deck, and in his example, you're confronting the threat of Nazi Germany and Hitler. Everyone gets on board, and so Wheeler found himself immersed in all of this in very conflicted ways, and so this autobiography is a really interesting read. And it was Wheeler that talked about this concept of quantum foam, that this sort of space, the vacuum that seems to occupy most of our universe, is in fact filled with energy and geometric forces that this energy seemed to perpetuate. And it was really Feynman who emerged from his studies with Wheeler, who I think famously said that if you took the energy inside of 2 coffee cups, it would be enough to evaporate all of the oceans on our planet. And then this sort of brings you back to Einstein's E = mc squared, right? And so that this space where it would appear that there's really nothing is in fact where the action is really happening. And I love that Wheeler sort of characterized that. And Wheeler once said, and I'll read this quote, this famous sort of quote: "It from bit, that which we identify as material, the it, ultimately has its origins in information." The bit here being a bit of information. It from bit symbolizes the idea that every item of the physical world has at bottom an immaterial source and explanation, that all things physical are information, theoretic in origin, and that this is a participatory universe. And what he meant by that, I believe, John, was that humans are also, at their core, immaterial.
Right.
And interacting with the material world is more than just, well, there's a book, I'm going to pick it up and look at it and read it. What Wheeler was beginning to identify was that humans and the consciousness that humans embody could actually affect the material world, that the non-material affected the material, and as a human, as this material avatar, you, through your consciousness, this developed mind and all these beautiful gifts, could actually alter the material world. And some of the geeks out there might recall the double slit experiments that suggested that photons could either act like a particle when you shot them through a slit, or they could act like a wave. And the form with which the photon took was altered by the conscious observer, the observer effect. And the observer effect, John, may be, in my view, one of the most humbling and awe-inspiring findings that we've ever had. To me, it would suggest that we are capable of altering the realities that we are in at any time and in any place. And there's something magical about that, right? This is the Harry Potter world, where instead of a wand, you're using your consciousness, you're using your thoughts, you're ultimately using your beliefs. And depending on the nature of one's beliefs and thoughts and the emotions and behaviors that they induce, the reality that you impact will either serve you well or maybe be a great source of angst and suffering. And that it's a much more sort of interactive model. And that's what I think Wheeler meant about participatory universe.
Yeah, and of course, the contemporary, studies that have been done with water structures, and these have been done in Japan, for instance. I forget the name of the researcher that has shown how the conscious state of an individual can affect the structure of water um, that is in a container right next to them.
It's
You
a
know,
great
I-
example, John. And there
yeah,
are um, uh, Emoto,
Emoto,
the
correct.
Japanese
Right, right.
researcher, brilliant work that, of course, couldn't easily find its way into sort of
Yeah,
mainstream thinking.
no.
And a contemporary, Gerald Pollack
Oh
at
yeah, of
University
course.
of Washington, and his
Sure.
research on the fourth phase of water, showing that light in the infrared frequency. This is just another member of the light orchestra.
Yeah,
Um, will alter the structure of water just when you thought you knew everything about water, right? Most people who teach chemistry, biology,
yeah,
physics, you know, they think we know everything there is to know about water. What more can you know? Um, Pollock and certainly Emoto was suggesting that water, in fact, is intelligent and can store energy and can
yeah,
actually communicate. What a novel, um, mind-bending sort of concept. And really, this is all photoelectric. This can all be brought back to some of those foundational, um, right in our face in modern medicine is the
yeah,
placebo effect. How the
right.
simple belief, strong, committed, unfaltering belief in a particular effect can induce the biology that produces that effect. Uh, in much the same way that if one's beliefs are that of fear and harm and bad things happening, the reality that ultimately they confront is likely to mirror that. And so you begin to see how this participatory universe that Wheeler was talking about um, is very much, I think, piercing the veil of material science. This is what you start to see
Yeah,
on the other side of that veil. And I don't think medicine will ever be able to cure anything until it pierces that veil and begins to look at humans as more than molecules and subatomic particles. It's just not going to get you there. And history would suggest that we're still very much stuck when you look at the epidemiology of chronic complex disease and the promise of cures that to date continue to fall short of expectations. So yeah, there's just so much here. So let's get into just a little bit about the physics here. And Wheeler, I think, understood that the original pursuit of understanding particles like electrons, there's a point beyond which the particle no longer exists.
mm,
And it's not like nothing is there at that point. That is when you start to see the energy. The photon is not a particle now, it's a wave.
yeah,
Uh, and that wave is information. And the information varies depending on the frequency of that wave. And that was the revelation that I think Wheeler uh, found most profound in his lifetime of work. So imagine, John, a photon leaving the sun and traveling, 190 million miles, this packet of information. And when it gets through the planet's atmosphere, it hits our skin. You're out, you're cutting your
mm,
lawn, maybe you're out playing baseball. And this millions of mile photon traveled interacts with a cholesterol molecule in your skin, and it breaks a bond in that molecule specifically, in a very specific site, and it begins to convert that cholesterol to vitamin D. Uh, so, I mean, just think about that,
No,
right?
it's incredible. Or think about how it has the ability to help attach a sulfate anion to whether it be cholesterol or heparin and all of the other molecules that need to have that SO4, that sulfur and four oxygens attached to it as a sulfate. I mean, it drives those. I think it's amazing how much biology is changed by this single photon. It's incredible.
Exactly. And what we know is that this photon, and in this example, this is an ultraviolet B photon. So this is a photon whose energy, packet of energy, uh, and the frequency of that energy is 290 nanometers. Uh, and so that unique energetic frequency has very specific effects in undoing a bond, a chemical bond. It the that cholesterol toward the surface of the skin is then changes its shape, and as you say, John, this unleashes a a cascade of biology that suddenly you go from cholesterol to a precursor of vitamin D thanks to an ultraviolet photon. You now have pre vitamin D, and what the body then does, as we've talked about, that vitamin D then goes to the liver and then goes to the kidney where it becomes most fully active. And as you frequently comment on, vitamin D's, we all sort of understand and we're taught that it helps with calcium and bone strength. But vitamin D is a transcription factor. Vitamin D has above top secret access to every nucleus and every cell, and not all molecules have that top secret access. And once it accesses the nucleus, it turns on all these genes, a couple of hundred that are understood to date. So now we've got one photon in that UVB range, which has a small amount of energy, just enough to break a very specific bond in a very specific molecule that leads to the production of vitamin D that now is like an agent that is probably sensing the conditions of the environment, since that's where the signal originated, time of day, amount of sunlight in the environment. And now we have this agent that is profoundly affecting human biology from head to toe. And that, if that doesn't bring people to their knees, John, I don't know what would.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah,
and
and we know, Mark, and we know that, not every photon results in the generation of vitamin D, right? That there's a feedback loop there where vitamin D is kept in a fairly tight physiological window. We might say 40 to 50, we might say 45 to 55. I mean, again, it's going to depend on a few factors, but which always begs the question, okay, then what? What do those photons that don't initiate this cascade we're describing, what happens to that energy? Because we have to go back to that basic premise, which all matter absorbs sunlight, right? So all that energy that those photons are carrying have other profound influences on our physiology outside of this vitamin D pathway. And that's where I think things get really fascinating, because that's more of the unknown. Like the vitamin D is at least, right? At least at that part of this equation is understood and appreciated by the medical community, right? Everybody understands that sunlight has this positive effect on our physiology in this way. But what if we open up the door to that fourth phase of water? We know that the texture or the consistency let's call it the viscosity of our cytoplasm is influenced by this energy. And obviously, there's an optimal level of viscosity or thickness of that gel that's going to make the cell much more effective. It's going to make the immune system more, just more robust. So then there's all these other compartments in our physiology that energy from those photons is changing. And I think that's where we're on the cusp of something, hopefully. I mean, again, you and I talk all the time about for some reason, the inability of the scientific community, the scientific enterprise, let's say, to accept the role of this energy, right, in changing our health. But it gives me optimism that there'll be an evolution, let's say, of the mindset, the collective mindset about the importance of sunlight. But anyways, I digress there. But I just think the photon, at some point, it stops driving additional vitamin D production because there is an optimal physiological window. And that's a beautiful thing, right? That the body can say, okay, enough of the vitamin D. Now some of this energy is it's gonna be redirected, right, into other areas of physiology.
Yeah, that's such a great point, John. And this is such a vast topic, and vitamin
Right. It's
D
huge.
is sort of
Yeah.
one example
Yeah.
that I think people can relate to because
Right.
it's
They
the
can
most
wrap their heads
frequently
around
talked
it. Yeah.
about. And yet, to your point, John, it's the tip of this really complex symphony of photon biologic interaction and the exclusion zone water,
Yeah.
water as a capacitor. Water in human biology would look different than the Dasani that you're drinking out of a bottle, right?
Right. Right.
Um, and it these properties are made possible only through interaction of these very specific light frequencies. It's a from an evolutionary biologic perspective, and people may know this, but these all animals, including invertebrates, have photon receptors.
Exactly.
This pervades every living
Right.
being, life form on our planet. These are universal evolutionary biologic adaptations, and which is why absence of sun means absence of all life on our planet. Um, and to the point that you're making here, John, when you get beyond sort of the vitamin D and the ultraviolet B, and I think this is where there's a lot of interesting debate, but even today, there's not great either appreciation for this research or acceptance of the implication of the research. And that so take a photon of blue light. This is right a packet of information. The difference is the frequency of the wavelength of these packets of blue light are 480 nanometers. That's an entirely different piece of information. And so, in the physical world, we call that blue light, specifically sky blue. This is, there are many different sort of shades of blue. And interestingly, John, this wavelength is one of the only wavelengths of visible light that can penetrate depths of water. And you find in aquatic species and even those that live deep in the depths of ocean water will have receptors for blue light. This is a very unique frequency. And what we associate today with blue light is that our retina have receptors for this exact frequency of light, much in the same way that the 10-11 cholesterol carbon bond has, it can be disrupted with ultraviolet light. In this example, the retina has receptors. They're not visual receptors,
Right.
for this frequency of light. And when they engage this frequency of light, the protein changes its shape, its configuration, and we know that that changes function. And this receptor, also known as melanopsin, seems to be central in its circadian effects. This would be the light equivalent of the on switch of our circadian biology, which for well adapted humans will be in those early morning hours. That's when this switch has evolved to be on. After sunset, this switch has evolved to be off, completely off. And so we're beginning to see that blue light is an important player in circadian biology. And as we've talked about often, John, if your circadian biology is not well entrained with sun rising, sun setting, diurnal cycling, environmental cycling, you can anticipate significant challenges to your health span, your quality of life, your chronic complex disease risk, ultimately your longevity. And so getting this wavelength of light at the times we were designed to get it, and not getting it, we've talked about the quality of darkness, and all of this information hopefully is synergistic and incremental and additive as people sort of think about this. This is one of the key mechanisms that has not been well understood until very recently. And so ultimately, so we have one example of light in the UVB range interacting with skin. We have another example of light photons of a different frequency in the blue range interacting in the retina and the eye, and that's sort of what you would expect, right, John? How many ways can we receive light? Well, we've got our skin, this huge surface area, right? This huge organ. And then we have our pupils, which are a portal into the retina. You have direct access to really the brain. And so these are highly evolved systems. And again, here, this is just an example of how this blue light interacts with these non-visual receptors, these melanopsin receptors, and it's really what begins to introduce circadian rhythm. And so that blue light becomes just a major issue in terms of how synchronized our circadian rhythms are. And then just another example, John, that we talk about, and that's UVA, right? This is a photon that has a little bit of a higher frequency than UVB. Here you're looking at the release of nitric oxide from the superficial layers of skin and the dermis and epidermis. And we know that nitric oxide is one of the key players in allowing capillaries, where most of the blood flow to our end organs is happening. They start in the large vessels. That's where most of our sort of interventional cardiac vascular enterprise focuses. It's on opening up the macro vessels in the heart, maybe in the legs. What we're talking about are capillaries. This is really where the largest volume of blood is ultimately being received at the level of organs and tissue and cells. And so nitric oxide is just an enormously important regulator of that system, and
huge evolutionary role for it. If you think about the need for cooling, for temperature control of the body, UVA is associated with the need to have a greater perfusion of blood flow to the surface, right, to the periphery of the body. And wow, I mean, just such powerful effects if it happens on a daily basis, to get those surges in nitric oxide, right, opening up blood vessels, moving blood around. This is beautiful stuff. and it's fundamentally essential for cardiovascular and circulatory health. So it's just amazing that it isn't appreciated more by that area of medicine. But
Yeah, right. There's this seemingly uncrossable bridge to that revelation, John, that we often talk about.
we
And
have
when you,
drugs, right? We have drugs that elevate nitric oxide levels, whether that be for, erectile dysfunction or cardiovascular purposes. Nobody, the elephant in the room here is sunlight.
yes,
If you really want to mobilize nitric oxide, and again, to the credit of certain, there are cardiologists out there that are kind of more pioneers in this, guys like Steven Sinatra, right? And there's a list. There's a list of cardiologists that,
yeah, Krauss in
yes,
that
exactly.
category.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and they will say, look, the whether you want to look at the role of electrons in promoting better circulation and the zeta potential, or you want to look at the importance of really absorbing this energy, this sunlight, and these photons for greater circulatory effects because of nitric oxide release. There are cardiologists out there that really embrace this and promote it. But wow, by and large, it's missed on by most patients who have circulatory issues.
And it becomes easier to understand why disruptions in circadian rhythm by, for example, spending more than 90% of your total time of life indoors,
Yeah.
by very little blue light at the time of day you need it most, and too much blue light at the time of day you don't want any, how those conditions, which we know are disrupting all of these pathways, lead to much higher prevalence of cardiovascular disease, of MI, of stroke, of
Yeah.
cardiovascular death. And so it's you've got the mechanisms, you've got the epidemiology, you've got clinical studies, and yet it's still very hard to identify the elephant in the room. To your point, John, and then just to sort of extend this, we're giving examples. And again, we talk a lot about this, but just to kind of bring it back to this biophysics, and we're just sort of going along the light spectrum. When you get to the red and near infrared lights, again, these are photons. They have different frequencies, right? These are lower frequencies compared to the ultraviolet range. They penetrate more deeply, as we've talked about, through these optical windows, deeper into our tissues. And we know that this particular wavelength of light has numerous effects, not just on wound healing and collagen production, but I think what's most exciting and interesting, John, and this relates to the work on water, Gerald Pollack's work and Emoto's work, is the effect of these wavelengths of light on mitochondria.
Yeah.
And mitochondria are, we could talk all day about mitochondria, these organelles that seem to be connected to many chronic complex modern diseases, and particularly degenerative neurologic diseases and chronic pain syndrome, some of the most challenging and difficult things for modern medicine to get their head around can be traced to alterations in mitochondrial function. And here you've got specific wavelengths of light that stimulate these proteins in the inner mitochondrial membrane, the cytochrome C oxidase, where ATP is produced, where electrons tunnel. Electron tunneling essentially is like it would be the equivalent of Harry Potter and his friends getting on the train to Hogwarts. You walk right through the brick wall at the train station. You don't go around it. You go right through it. That's the most efficient path from A to B. And when these systems are working well, electrons flow freely. They almost defy classical Newtonian physics, because at the level of the quantum, you're dealing with different laws of nature. Things work differently. So you can begin to see how light can completely charge mitochondrial function, energy production, reaching depths of tissue penetration that are profound. And so three sort of different wavelengths, UVB, UVA, red, infrared, all with very profound effects, and all generated by really the sort of photoelectric effect. These sensitive proteins that have evolved to be in relationship with specific frequencies of light that completely change structure and function in response to that engagement. And they do so in ways that every life form on this planet has evolved to benefit from. Uh,
And and
and
sunlight, Mark, basically it's an alphabet made up of photons, right? And every photon has a different level of energy. So in a way, it's a different letter, helping communicate with our biology, different words made up of different energy levels, right? Each having a necessity. The body has a necessity for the entire alphabet. If you just get one spectrum of light, you're behind glass all the time. You might get UVA, but you're not going to get the other two. So you're getting some of that, you're getting some of that information, but you need the full spectrum. You need the entire alphabet, and every compartment of the human body needs to have all of those letters of the alphabet assembled in different ways for us to have the downstream effects, right? That the biochemistry flows once these words are assembled from different energy levels and photons. It's incredible. It's incredible. And it's a complex topic. And I know that for a lot of people, when you just say the words quantum physics, right, or you talk about the relationship between energy, a conscious state, photons, and then our biology, I think for a lot of people, just not having the exposure to that, which, again, it was a long time ago for myself, looking at some of these different concepts. But once you really bridge the connection between those two worlds of sunlight, energy, photons, and you understand all of the different compartments in the human body that can absorb and utilize that energy, I think you appreciate it on a much deeper level than just, let's say, vitamin D. We use vitamin D, and these slides are phenomenal. We use vitamin D as almost like a surrogate because it's the one area, right, where there is more of this universal acceptance of the need for a molecule that in ideal terms, which you're going to go into now, in an ideal scenario is always produced in the body, at least some of it, right? I mean, obviously vitamin D is found naturally in certain foods, a very small number, but in an ideal situation, we're making the majority of the vitamin D that circulates in our body, we're making it from these photons reacting with cholesterol, right? So yeah, I'm sorry.
no,
Yeah,
that's great, John. And just mindful of time, we'll just want to go over two more slides here. We'll finish on that theme, John, and then we'll come up and pick up on this because
yeah.
I know we're a little bit constrained in how much time we can run with this morning. But you brought up earlier, John, how nature, the systems in nature are self-regulating. They're intelligent. They get feedback, they adapt to that feedback, then there's an output. That output will produce more feedback, and it's a continuous loop of feed-forward feedback information. That appears to be very much the sort of structure of this reality that we're in. And what intelligent systems do is they maintain balance. And you see that in vitamin D. When you make it from light exposure, you can't overdose. There is a ceiling. Um, you'll make more melanin. That melanin will absorb more of the ultraviolet light that you're exposed to. Less of it goes to vitamin D production. And so, unlike taking a vitamin D supplement, though risks from super high vitamin D tend to be infrequent as people are more mindful of dosing and can get their vitamin D levels measured, you can get into significant toxicity. True of any pill that you're taking. These are not smart pills. You take them, whatever's in there breaks down, gets absorbed, and the body tries to figure out how best to use it. And so it also makes me think, John, of as we've oversimplified the story to vitamin D, and there are a lot of researchers, Michael Hollick, who we talk about, is an exception, that see very little value in general in vitamin D supplementation. A lot of the clinical research looking at vitamin D supplementation compared to, say, a placebo haven't shown dramatic clinical outcomes, the outcomes that you hope you might see.
Yeah, it's true. Very, very true. Yeah.
And yet we know epidemiologically that people at more southern latitudes, people that historically have more sun exposure, have much lower rates of cardiovascular disease, of cancer, of cognitive decline. Yet the only research using vitamin D as an oral supplement where you do see measurable benefits are in people who are starting with very low doses, levels less than 10, less than maybe 15. Right. So there's some value there, but it underscores the difference between a very black and white simplified view of vitamin D, take a pill if it's low, versus reconnecting with the original systems whereby vitamin D was produced and understanding that these are two entirely different systems. Both can increase your measured level of vitamin D in the blood, but it would be like comparing, right, this beautiful symphonic production with, someone just learning how to play their keyboard. And so people are puzzled. They say, well, vitamin D clinical research doesn't really show a lot of benefit. Therefore, vitamin D, it's not as important as everyone out there is saying that it is. Totally misses the context of the mechanism whereby the vitamin D is being produced. And as you've pointed out repeatedly, John, the UVB is just one issue. That same light is giving you the blue light, the red light, the near, mid, and far infrared light, every other frequency in between. And you cannot compare the biologic output of that system compared to the biologic output of having your vitamin D level measured. It's low. You take this supplement and get on with your life. If you're not, if you have a low vitamin D and you don't consider the need to be outdoors more at critical times, you're totally missing the point of what's going on. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. And then this just kind of makes the point. This is Michael Hollick, who's produced this slide from some of his research. When you look at these indigenous cultures that are outside all the time, their vitamin Ds run between 40 and 60. Yeah. They're not 100, 120. If you're getting all that light, again, they adapt. They don't need more vitamin D than that. Those photons, that energy, that information is going, as you so nicely articulated, John, is going to many, many other biologic needs. And And we might say in those cultures you don't see a lot of chronic complex disease. It again, it's uh, the all of the pieces start to connect, and yet it's very hard for the those looking at the parts of the elephant to just see that part and come away with an underappreciation of just how profound these interactions are and how important they are now, so more than ever.
Yeah, Mark, it's incredible how many people can feel the energy from the sun, especially right if they've had a long window of absence from it. You go somewhere for vacation in the winter if you're from a northern latitude, or even in the summer, you get outside on a weekend day and you absorb sunlight for an extended period of time, and you just feel, people feel really chill. They can sense like a total body relaxation from it, right? It feels so good. And yet all of that which they feel gets overridden by what they have in their head and everything they've been told, like, got to stay out of the sun and what it's doing skin. It's kind of, for me, it's like the prime example of how we can feel something, right? And you can have that biological effect, but the brain just gets in the way and prevents people from adopting that on a regular basis. It's really fascinating, like in human behavior, how we have the inability to kind of follow what our body feels is right by what we've been told to do.
Yeah, that really sums up sort of the paradox of the world we're in right now. When the
Yeah.
evidence parts ways with what we're taught, or when our experience parts ways with what we're taught, we I think often fail to see that as an opportunity to say, what's up with that?
Yeah.
What do I trust, my experience of life or what this person is telling me? And um, that's where true sovereignty, we're in this time of the year where we're going to be celebrating our 250th anniversary as a country. Where is what does it mean to have freedom, to have
Yeah.
liberty?
Yeah.
And I think of sovereignty, this self-discernment, the ability to experience, to contemplate what that experience is, and then to choose based on what that is teaching you is so much more powerful than just downloading all this sort of stuff and trying to make sense of it. And there's probably a balance there, but true liberty and true freedom is the ability to see beyond the programming.
Yeah. That's
Otherwise,
beautiful.
you're in a prison cell of which you don't know that you're in, and that's it's hard to escape something when you don't perceive that you're captive. And I think that's sort of I'm not pontificating, I'm not judging. I just think that's part of the challenge of modern.
Believe what you feel, brother. Believe what you feel.
Believe what you feel.
That's right.
Exactly. Well, this is a good. I know you've got a commitment, as do I,
Yeah,
John.
but we got to reconvene on this. This is, brother, I love this topic.
We
It's
will
yeah.
we will pick up on this. And again, I want to just give a shout out to the Feynman Way YouTube
Yeah.
channel for all their amazing work, which I appreciate, and these graphics in particular, which I have shamelessly borrowed in the spirit of making some of the points graphically that we're talking about. And so we appreciate people listening to The Health Edge. Check out our website, thehealthedgepodcast.com. John and I have a pathetic social media presence, and we don't get any sponsorship by design. We get approached by folks that would love for us. We just try to keep it clean and have fun with it. So we hope people appreciate the spirit within which we share this stuff, and look forward to picking up on this conversation when we next connect, John.
I can't wait, Mark. I love you, bro.
Love you too, my friend.
Take care.
Peace.
Peace.